I'm Tom Tachek. That's Eric Monti from Montesano, and I guess we're going to start the talk now.
Okay. All right, so Tom just gave our intros. We both work for Montesano Security, which is an indie security research and testing firm. We're founded in Chicago and New York City. Been around for about 2 years. We specialize in research and services around security. You guys probably know that some may know that Tom is kind of a specialist in speaking on the hardware virtualized rootkits, and these are some of the other things that we've also dealt with. Today we're here to talk about probably the second point here, agent and endpoint agent vulnerabilities and kind of security issues around them. Okay, so who hasn't heard of information leakage? This is obviously a huge problem. These are some statistics. You've probably seen plenty of others. It's hard not to pick up some of the tech rags nowadays, and every couple days, a couple times a week, you're going to be hearing stories like these. The statistic on here states, for instance, more than 150 million personal records leaked in incidents between 2005 and 2007 alone, and obviously it's just getting bigger and bigger. Just a couple weeks ago, you probably heard of the Certegy Check Services incident with an employee on site working in the IT infrastructure, making off with about 2.3 million records of customers and selling them on the information market. There's an example of your intentional data theft, which is probably sexier and more interesting sounding, but I think a much bigger problem too is just the general problem of unintentional leakage. You hear plenty of cases. My girlfriend, who's a teacher for the Chicago public school system, recently found out a year ago that her name was on a laptop that was stolen from the premises. You've got plenty of cases where people lose USB disks. Nobody knows what happens to the data on them. Or this one, which has been talked about a lot on our blog and other places, with employees using newspapers and wrapping customer records around them or in them. It's just mind-boggling.
Looking at the audience right here, I'm guessing that this particular slide you've seen, about 100 times before, and that this is motherhood and apple pie. And we're not putting it on the screen for you guys, though we can tell you that data loss is a huge problem for enterprises today. Clearly it is. Clearly you know about it, because clearly if you are like most of our clients on the enterprise side, your CFO, your risk officers, whoever, have approached you about the fact that they're concerned that they're going to wind up in the newspaper. The issue here is not the numbers. It's not the amount of information that's being lost. It's not the damage that's doing to people. The issue is that these losses are hitting the newspaper. And the people responsible for that are in C-level offices in these companies. We're here today to talk to you guys about extrusion prevention systems. We're going to talk a little bit more about what the talk's going to be about and what material we're going to cover. But I'm going to tell you that the reason I think this talk is relevant to you guys, or all of you, is that as people involved in security, particularly enterprise security, you're being confronted with solutions to this problem from vendors. And these vendors, uniquely among a lot of different other security companies, these vendors are apparently really good at selling to C-level executives the idea that they will keep them out of the newspaper. What we're perceiving from our clients is that enterprise security teams are, excuse the loaded term, having this technology foisted upon them. They're being asked to deploy in some way, shape, or form some sort of due care system to keep them out of the newspaper. And we're here to talk to you guys about what those systems are, what they look like, and what the implications to you guys are for having to support these systems on your network. We'll talk a little bit more about why we're the people who should be talking about that and what we've done and why you should take us seriously. This is going to be an interesting talk for us to give for reasons that will become clear in just a couple slides. But again, I would tell you that what we're trying to say with this slide is just that the real issue here is that extrusion prevention systems are a top 3 budget item for enterprise security teams today. And you're going to wind up deploying these systems. At least the odds favor that you're going to have to. And we have a lot of questions that we want you asking your vendors and a lot of things that we want you paying attention to when you deploy those systems.
So as Tom mentioned, we've got the space of information leak prevention products which are now coming towards us in the enterprise, pitching their services, and their goal is to solve this problem or at least mitigate it for us severely. So what I guess I'd like to talk about here is that these are the things that ideally at a high level these products are trying to accomplish within the realm of extrusion detection. Obviously, they want to identify the sensitive data in your organization, whether it be customer records, financial information, your company secrets, and it even gets fuzzier into information that maybe is business inappropriate coming in and out of your enterprise. These are all things that they're trying to detect and potentially block. They do this obviously by sitting in the middle of your users and the outside world. That can be a pretty large space. We'll get more into where those boundaries are.
So if you look at the functionality here, I think one of the things we want to draw out as a comparison is if you're familiar with IDS systems, the technology we're talking about here, very similar to intrusion detection. That's why we use the term, which I think Richard Baitlick invented. He's in the audience over there. Maybe he didn't invent it. All I know is that we're horribly, horribly abusing the term. But instead of detecting attacks coming into the network, you're attempting to detect your most sensitive information leaving the network. These are kind of the broad goals of extrusion detection systems. This is what the products are being deployed to do. And one of the interesting things about this is I think a lot of people have a lot of opinions about IDS systems, but one of the things that extrusion detection systems do a little bit differently than IDS is that they do a lot more forensics work than a normal IDS system does. On the network side of things, forensics and data capture and all that is kind of a separate area from intrusion detection and signature detection and finding individual attacks. But in the extrusion detection space, that functionality is combined in a way that it isn't on the other side. And that has some implications for how these systems work and how reliable they are. And it also has some implications for what the issues or the implications of deploying this technology on your network are.
Okay, another point to take away from this too is that if you look at this list of requirements, Tom touched on forensic data, but we've seen a lot of this before. And again, there's a reason that this is parallel to the former definition of extrusion detection in that these are all of these concepts are very closely tied to intrusion detection at their core. That was sort of the granddaddy of all of this stuff. So bear that in mind strongly as we're talking about this, because we'll touch on it a lot more. So on that note, these are sort of how a lot of these, the product space and the solutions, and there are even, I've heard of open source and third-party grow your own approaches to this. And they'll generally even follow one of these or some combination of these types. You'll have the high levels here of network-based and agent-based, and then hybrids, and I'll get into kind of where hybrid falls in there and what that means. Obviously, network-based, the parallel to draw there is to a network IDS system. You're sitting on the endpoints of the network as opposed to necessarily the endpoints of every workstation, which is where the agent-based steps in. You can think of that more as host-based intrusion detection. Except here we're talking, of course, about extrusion detection.
One of the things we want to point out here is, again, I'm going to draw the parallel again to intrusion detection systems, and it's a sub-bullet on this slide, but when you're thinking about how the underlying engine and the underlying technology of these systems work, think that in the best case, you're looking at a snort level of sophistication about ripping through protocols and file formats. In the worst case, when you're looking at the system, you're looking at, if you're familiar with tools like ngrep, straight up string matching and straight up pattern matching. So there's a spectrum of quality or of sophistication to these systems, and that's something that you should also pay attention to as well.
Okay. I mentioned that I'd just touch on hybrids. The notion there is that these both have strengths and weaknesses, and we're going to talk a little bit about them, but I guess I'll touch on them really briefly here. NIDS, I think, or the network-based approach to detection, it has the strength that you're one central point, and it's hard for an attacker or a malicious user or even an accidental user to screw that point up. You have more control centrally. This is the force multiplier point on here. Whereas agent-based, with this type of detection, you're getting better visibility, at least in concept, to the data that you're trying to monitor. A NIDS would never be able to, or I'm sorry, a network EDS solution would never be able to say, by itself monitor your devices on computers in the workstation. And these are a big leak point, right? USB drives, peripherals, printers, screenshots, copy and paste. Their focus is on the network. And the agent-based solutions also claim to be able to do the network monitoring from the agent out. So you'll see, though, that there are architectural differences that come into play here. With hybrids, I think the notion of hybrids, at least in my mind, is the products that try and incorporate the two different types, take their strengths from both, and hopefully try and achieve a better result.
You're going to find in the market, by the way, that almost every mainstream vendor of extrusion detection systems is moving towards the hybrid model. Everybody wants to have both sides of this solution. What you're going to find in this talk is that we're going to be talking a little bit more about the endpoint side of things. We want to keep things relevant to both sides, but for a variety of reasons. We're going to be talking primarily about endpoint or agent-based extrusion detection systems.
Right, and I should point out, yeah, there's a good reason for that. The network-based IDS approach and network-based IDSs have been talked about in great detail. I stand here with somebody who is actually a well-known name in doing that. So we want to really talk about the stuff that's lesser known and lesser covered.
So here's where it gets interesting, and sorry for the not very long-winded wind-up for this. Let me start talking about why we're talking to you today. For the past 9 months or so, Modisano Security has been running a research project with enterprise customers and on our own, looking at a variety of mainstream commercial extrusion detection systems. We're talking about mainstream brand name systems here. And when we looked at these systems, we were chartered to find out how effective they were and also what the implications were to deploying them on networks. We tend to come into engagements like this for clients expecting to find things. What we find is that with shrink-wrap products, it is rare to find an off-the-shelf product that has actually been formally audited or had a formal penetration done of the application itself. We find that that doesn't happen very often. That's a good question if you're ever buying security solutions in general. If you take away one point from this whole talk, ask your vendor, has this solution been externally reviewed? And if so, who did it? I'm telling you this because I asked this question on behalf of enterprise clients, and I have never once gotten an answer that said, in fact, I'll be generous and name one of my competitors. I've never heard somebody say that ISEC Partners or Leviathan Security or any of the other people that were mentioned in the Mozilla talk today reviewed this and gave it a stamp of approval. You can bet, by the way, that if they had it externally reviewed, they'd have a big certificate on the front of their box saying, ISEC Partners, independent security stamp of approval. And by the way, when you see that stamp, ISEC Partners is a great company, right? Ask if it's been looked at. We got to look at these systems, not on behalf of the vendors necessarily, in fact, on behalf of people that were trying to select these systems and deploy them. So we're coming at these systems from a black box perspective, exactly the same amount of information that you guys would get if you were deploying them on your network. And we applied all the tools and techniques that we use to look at systems and find out whether they're effective and whether they have vulnerabilities. We expect to find vulnerabilities in systems, and in this case, we were not disappointed. We found a myriad of different vulnerabilities that we're going to discuss in one way or another in this talk. We looked at, I'll tell you, between 4 to 8 systems, and I'm sure you're already starting to groan because I'm jazz-handing who we looked at. What I'll say is that none of the systems that we looked at emerged from our review unscathed. And I'm going to attribute that to the fact that they weren't reviewed by